Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out. Okay?
Yeah, better.
I really appreciate that we're all showing up for this very important day, which is celebrated around the world and is meant to remind us of really, I think, how unusual and how wonderful it is to be at peace. And we can be very thankful to live in a country like Canada, which remains at peace, at least within the boundaries of Canada. But what I wanted to say today is to bring up a number of other concerns. Well, they're not really other concerns because they're really very closely tied to the whole matter of peace. But they extend, I think, the area of our concerns about beyond merely stamping out wars and armed and violent conflicts as they occur around the world, as important as that may be, to concerns with the causes of war, the things which destroy peace, which bring about violent conflict, and lead to the kind of stories we were hearing earlier from our friends from Sudan and Ethiopia. One of these concerns, I think, which we're going to have to pay much more attention to than we have, is the kind of lopsided globalization which is taking place in the world today and has been taking place for the last couple decades. I'm not against globalization itself. I think globalization can be a real force for maintaining peace in the world. But it's lopsided in the sense that it is totally dominated by the kind of outlook that the leaders of our great corporations and financial institutions have toward how the world should develop its economy. They believe that profits of the corporations come first, they're the driving force, and then that will inevitably lead to economic development, and all ships will rise in the general rising tide. But as a matter of fact, what this kind of globalization has led to is vast inequalities in the developing world. When you think, for example, of Nigeria, which has been subject to a lot of globalization and which thinks, well, I don't know whether they think it's fortunate or not now, but they have a great deal of oil there. But it's led to tremendous inequalities. The development of elites in these countries, which then maintain themselves through the armed military might that they are able to purchase with the wealth that they accumulate for themselves. And in the meantime, the vast majority of the people are left in the same sort of poverty which it was our aim to remove them from in the beginning. And then you get violent conflicts, such as we do have in Nigeria. The same sort of thing has happened in Mexico, in Chiapas, the violent conflicts in Chiapas. And now, in general, the dreadful decimation of Mexican agriculture and the general people of rural Mexico who depended upon their agriculture for a living. The other concern which I want to bring up, which I think is leading to a deterioration in the conditions that maintain peace around the world, and it's related to the one I just mentioned, is the increasing shortage of potable water. Because of the kind of economic development which is taking place, the amount of water which is actually usable for drinking purposes is rapidly declining, and a vast shortage is taking place mainly in some of the most poverty-stricken areas of the world. These two gentlemen, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about here. That's going to be a dreadful source of conflict in the future. I think particularly of the Middle East, where water is short to begin with, but becoming ever shorter. That area, of course, is well known for its conflicts, and this is going to be another source of great conflict in that area. And then there is also the development of huge human migrations. A story which hasn't received much play in the press is the migration of people from Africa across the Mediterranean into Europe. And this has been accompanied by a lot of violence, which continues on in Italy and in Spain and in Malta and some of the other countries, which are the first stepping stones for people coming from Africa to Europe. Why are they moving? Well, again, it's tied back to these questions of unequal economic, or the inequality which results from the kind of economic development which is going on. These people have no jobs, they have no way of making a living, so they're desperate to get across. Now on our own continent we have a similar situation. The people in Mexico and other areas of Latin America who also have been left behind by this kind of economic development which is proceeding. They're trying, of course, to get across the border to the United States. They come in their thousands every day, and a lot of them die in the process. And of course they're taken advantage of by all sorts of nefarious types who pretend to be able to give them a safe transit. That's going to lead to a lot of conflict. It is leading to a lot of conflict. It's something people who are concerned about peace need to be concerned about. Finally, I want also to draw this to a concern which people don't usually associate with peace. But I know probably, looking around at this crowd, I think you're probably aware of it, but I should mention it anyway. And that is the kind of economic development which we've had throughout this past century has been built on the use of fossil fuels. And now we see that this overuse of fossil fuels is changing the very climate of the earth. And according to the IPCC report, the effects of this will be worst felt in the developing world, in the countries which are least able to handle it. This is going to exacerbate the whole question of water that I mentioned earlier. It's going to lead to even further pressure for migration out of those countries. This is bound to lead to conflict. So the whole question of climate change is something that people who are concerned about peace also need to be concerned about. In general, what I want to say is that the peace movement, people who are concerned about peace, need to think of themselves more and more as part of a whole global movement which faces a whole group of closely interrelated issues, very much tied back to the way the world is trying to develop itself economically. We need here, and we have a movement which is developing. I'm proud to say that my organization, the Council of Canadians, is very active in this. A movement to make sure that considerations other than merely the profits of large corporations and financial institutions are taken into consideration when we think about how to develop the world we live in. That's my message. Thank you for coming out.